This is GM Daniel Naroditsky, and we are watching Hikaru Nakamura take on Levon Aronian at the 2014 FIDE World Blitz Championship in a Trompowski here by Hikaru. Levon going for the G6 variation, which is considered a very, very solid defense. Hikaru quickly taking that knight on f6, and Black's kingside pawn structure isn't amazing, but in such positions that f6 pawn advances frequently to f5 and clamps down on the e4 square. Instead, Levon developing his bishop to d6, choosing not to fianchetto it, so he's got some kingside weaknesses, and now he advances his pawn to h5, signifying his aggressive intentions, and now he develops the bishop to g4. Hikaru stopped that pawn in its tracks with h4, a bishop trade, and the trade of light squared bishops. Not sure who that favors, both sides playing quickly. Hikaru recapturing with the queen, and he's probably going to go for a quick c4 in order to occupy more of the center and try to get rid of Levon's key central pawn on d5, and both sides have virtually completed their development, and Levon still hasn't castled yet. Maybe he's deciding which way he wants to castle. He's got a lot of pawns that are advanced on the king side, so castling kingside would be a little bit dangerous, really, for both sides. And so both kings remain in the center. Now the battle revolves around whether Black can prevent c4. And for now, Levon is doing a good job of it. He's gotten his knight to b6. It's controlling the c4 square, and Hikaru brings his own knight back into the center. Levon going queen e7, and is he preparing queenside castles, trying to stay as flexible as possible? And both sides, they have the same decision to make, and Hikaru taking really the first think of the game, the first major thing for either player, and he advances his c-pawn up to c3, building that pawn hat. Usually there's a bishop on d3. This time there's a knight. The position looks pretty balanced to me. Both sides have pretty good control of the center. Development is almost complete, save for castling. And now the big question, where is Black going to castle and where is White going to castle? And that is, I'm sure, what Levon is thinking about as he drops now to 2.5 minutes on the clock. And he's finally made a decision, and he castles kingside. So queen e7, maybe he flirted with castling queenside, but he thought better of it, and now he goes kingside, and he has decided that his pawns on the kingside are safe enough. And will Hikaru try something super aggressive like g4, trying to blast through Black's kingside pawns? And he does, and Hikaru, not mincing his words, he wants to deliver checkmate, and that h4 pawn is going to move up to h5. Levon, he's pushed his pawn up to f5, but how is he going to prevent that very scary h4, h5 move? If the h-file opens, Black's king could get caught on the crossfire, and Levon's worst nightmare could come true. And I'm starting to like Hikaru's position. I'm not sure about Levon's decision to castle kingside. I think he might have underestimated Hikaru's attacking potential. And Hikaru's king is still in the center, but now I'm nearly certain that Hikaru will go queenside and involve his other rook in the attack, maybe bring it to g1. And Levon drops down to 2 minutes. Notice how White's knights, they control all of the key central squares. Queen e4 would have been a great move here for Levon, but that pesky knight on d2, it's controlling that square, so maybe knight c4 can be considered. And he does move the knight, but he brings it back around to d7, and Levon is probably aiming for the e4 square, but he's allowed h5, and Hikaru doesn't play it yet. He castles queenside first, and now his king is perfectly safe. Levon probably will continue his maneuver here with knight d7 to f6, but h5 is going to be even scarier with that other rook coming into g1. And Levon, he goes knight f6, and Hikaru seems pretty satisfied with his position. He's played pretty quickly. He's got 30 seconds extra on the clock. And will he play h5 here, or will he involve his rook on g1? It's always so hard when you're attacking to figure out exactly when the best moment is for a sacrifice. And let's see what Hikaru chooses here. He's taking a pretty significant think. The two big candidate moves here, rook g1 and h5, and Levon's knight, where will it go? Will it go to e4, or will it go to g4 in order to plug the hole on the g file? And Hikaru, with a very subtle move, rook d to e1. So what I think he's doing, I think he's actually preparing queen g2, followed by f3 and e4. So maybe Hikaru thought better of the move h5. Not sure why he didn't play it, but maybe he wants to play in the center, trying to keep his options open. And Levon taking that time to bring his king up to g7, and he's going to involve the rook in the defense with rook h8, and maybe Black's king is going to stay safe after all. Hikaru taking another big think, and now he's down on the clock. He's down to 1.5 minutes, and he's just not sure what to do here. Will he bring his queen back to g2? Will he maybe change his mind and play rook e1 to g1? I'm honestly not very sure why he put the rook on e1 in the first place. And his clock continues to creep downward, and now Levon is up 15 seconds. And Levon's strategy is very clear, and Hikaru, he's finally made a decision, and he plays h5, and Levon doesn't take that pawn. He goes rook h8, a trade on g6, further softening up Black's kingside pawn structure. And now Hikaru bringing his queen back to g2, aiming at that g6 pawn. It's still very scary for Black's king, but Levon's got a lot of pieces on the king side. And there's a case in point, and the knight does land on g4, prioritizing his defense is Levon as he plugs the g-file and provokes f3. Now, f3 could be very scary, but it does weaken the e3 pawn, and so Hikaru delays that move. And here he goes rook e1 to g1, and now he's preparing f3, so Levon trading rooks. A trade of rooks obviously favors the defending side, and Levon is breathing a little bit easier now that there's only one pair of rooks on the board, and rook h8 would be a very natural move to try to trade the second pair. But Levon not rushing with that move, and now both sides down to almost a minute. And Black's king is no longer an imminent danger. That bishop on d6 is also controlling the very important f4 square. So knight f4 is just not dangerous because of bishop takes f4. So Levon, he's got time. He doesn't have to play rook h8, but he's taking a very long thing here, and he's down to 50 seconds. And we know how dangerous Hikaru is in the opponent's time pressure. And Levon just cannot allow himself to get too low on the clock, and he's down to 40 seconds. And I'm not sure what he dislikes exactly about rook h8. Maybe it's rook takes h8 and f3, and that's kind of an interesting option, trying to get that knight off of g4, because the g6 pawn, it's going to be undefended in the event of a rook trade. But Hikaru could of course also keep the rooks on the board. He could play rook h1 to g1, but that would allow Black's rook to infiltrate to h2, and that could be nasty. And so Hikaru trades rooks. And now we have a very interesting endgame, and Hikaru does go for f3. Levon taking on e3. I thought he could have taken on e3 with the queen there, because now Hikaru's queen infiltrates to g6, and the attack continues even without the rooks, and bishop c7. Levon's king is still in danger, but everything seems to be protected for now. I still like Hikaru's position. f4 could be an interesting move here, and Hikaru hesitates, but now he plays it, and he's established a massive look at that e5 square that he's going to put his knight on, and without further delay, he plays knight e5, and in the event of a trade, that knight is going to be replaced by a no less monstrous passed pawn on e5. Hikaru definitely with the advantage in the endgame, but both sides are down to 30 seconds. Will he be able to convert? And he's deciding which pawn to take the bishop with, as Levon making an adjustment there, and Hikaru with an intermediate move. He decides to check on h5 first, and he sends the king to a more vulnerable square. There was something about that g6 square that Hikaru didn't like, and he thinks his queen is better on h5, and Levon covers with a queen. And Hikaru was going to play queen e8, but he didn't release his queen yet, and now he's thinking about the trade, and there was something he didn't like about that, and it was probably king g7. That would have allowed Levon to give a massive check on h1, and Hikaru shaking his head. He clearly doesn't like what's happened there, but I still think he's much better. Even with the queens off the board, that pawn on e5 is so dangerous. Levon takes the knight. Oh my goodness, isn't this pawn endgame lost? Levon thinking that he can build up a fortress, but Hikaru, normally when you've got a protected passer on e5 like that, it's losing, but Levon is trying to get his king to f5, and he thinks, or king to g5, and he thinks Hikaru cannot make progress, but now e6 could be very dangerous. It would send Black's king back to a very compromised position, and Hikaru spending the rest of his time to calculate. It's down to 15 seconds, and there goes e6, and he gives up his passed pawn, but he gets big king position here, and he's trying to shoulder Levon's king all the way down to the queen side. These endgames, they're 50-50. They're often lost. a5 by Levon, and now we've got some pawn play on the queen side. Hikaru responds in kind. a4 freezing Black's queenside pawns, and Levon pushes his b pawn up to b5. And will Hikaru trade, or will he go b3? And he does trade, and Levon takes back. And now the d5 pawn, that d5 pawn is isolated and incredibly weak. And Levon, eventually, he's going to have to move his king all the way back toward the queen side, and I think he's going to lose that d5 pawn. I think he's losing. Hikaru just waiting it out, and Black is now in zugzwang. He ran out of pawn moves, and king e6, b4 by Levon, trying to make progress and attack b2, and Hikaru, he's upset, but I think he's winning. He takes on d5, king takes b4. Will Levon reach the b2 pawn before Hikaru reaches the a4 pawn? No, he doesn't, and Hikaru wins the game. What technique. And if you like this video, make sure to click the link on the playlist for more of these videos. Thank you for watching.